So everyone, thank you so much for coming. I'm talking about doing user research today. And really I want to be very pragmatic about this because I hope somebody can actually get some useful stuff out of it. And so I'm going to really focus in on what to do when and make the tough decisions in large but also in small companies or startups. So wanted to thank the host, Pragmatic Leaders, for asking me to give this chat. I always love talking. Anybody who knows me will say that. And so appreciate it. Really quick about me, why should you listen to me and why should you care? So I started off in engineering, but quickly moved into human-computer interaction. And spent some time there and then did my own startups and I was an entrepreneur. I've worked cross-culturally, Middle East and the United States. And I also run my own agency and own software development companies. About 3 years ago, I worked at a company called Handsome, which is a really an amazing company that really focuses in on user research, and that really aligned with my thinking and passions, and so I'll be talking about them a little bit more. Since then, I've started up several companies. I have some startups, and I currently am Senior Vice President of Product Management and User Experience at BoomWriter Media. And so hopefully I know something about what I'm talking about. You be the deciders, but what you won't hear from me is a bunch of buzzwords, right? I'm a big believer the more buzzwords a person uses, the less I trust them, actually. So you're going to hear from people say things like data. They're going to use words like research or qualitative research. They're going to talk about design thinking or user-centric design or human-computer interaction, which of course I've already used some of these buzzwords, right? And of course, everybody is going to say that I'm user-focused, or they're going to say I'm data-driven. And yeah, sure, everybody says this. But really, what I want to get down into is not the science or the environment around user research and how that impacts product, but I really just want to let's be pragmatic, right? And pragmatism, I think, is really going to help us most, because a lot of us, we know about users, we know about user research generally, maybe some a little bit, maybe some a lot. There's probably people on this call who know a heck of a lot more than me, and that's fine. What I want to talk about is really the nuts and the bolts of it. So what is user research and what's the goal of it when it comes to product? And it's, let's not make it more difficult than it is. When we are product managers or we're product leaders, some of you may not be product managers, that's fine. We want to make a great product, right? I mean, that's our goal. We want to make a great product. If you don't want to make a great product, yeah, go have lunch, right? You don't need to be here, or you have dinner wherever you're located. But our goal is to have a great product. And there is no question that the product needs to be great. The person who decides greatness are the people who actually use it. And again, these are just basic concepts, but we just need to go back to the basics, is that the users of the product are the ones who determine greatness, not the co-founders, not the product manager, not the designers, not anyone, but the actual users. And so if it is actually the users who determine greatness, and as product managers, we want to create great products, we have to go to the users, right? So I'm going to talk about two examples of going to the users. One following a very focused process that I would say is a rigorous user research process. And this is done at companies that probably have large budgets. They do user research in a they take a lot of time. They do a lot of in-depth study, and they really want to build the right product. The other scenario I'm going to give is one I call guerrilla user research, which means you don't have a lot of time. You may not have buy-in from the stakeholders, and you just need to figure out things quick and dirty. And so I think we're going to launch with these two concepts of the deep process and then the as fast as you can process. And then we'll open it up to AMA, and we can have a conversation about this and talk about it. So the first company I'm going to talk about is called Compare. And this was a client that we had when I worked at the company called Handsome. This was from 2015, handsome.is, great company, does some really cool user interaction stuff. And the focus of Handsome, at least at that time, was definitely user research. We are all about the user experience and the user research. And so that's why I'm using it as a really good example of in-depth user research. It was an agency that companies hired us. In this case, Compare hired us. So the problem that Compare came to was they said, we're really good at finding cheap travel, but we're not good at inspiring people to book travel that they haven't already decided to do. And so this was the problem that Compare did. And so they wanted us to build a travel app that inspires travel. And that was the mandate. It was very simple, actually. It's kind of a dream project where they didn't tell you, they said they wanted a mobile app, and they wanted to deal with travel, and they wanted to inspire. Those are the three criteria, very, very broad. And so it was a fun project, to be honest. And so this is generally, I couldn't find the original image, so I actually had to rip out a photocopy. But this is generally, this is the Handsome process. But this is a general, typically UX process here, where they start with introspection and planning. So they start talking with the stakeholders. In this case, it was Compare. They start doing landscape research, figuring out what's out there. And they did also comparative and competitive research. We started doing some workshops and interviews. So we start interviewing not only the stakeholders, in this case because we were an agency, but we also interviewed about 15 people who had traveled recently or were about to travel. And then we plan out how we're going to do this. And so we do the contextual inquiries, we meet them face-to-face in their environment, we do usability audits, what they're working on, and we synthesize, and then we start wireframing, and it goes on from there. I'm not going to get into this whole process. I'm just going to actually tell you what we did. So market research. When you want to start a project, right, you can do user research once your product is already created. However, I personally strongly say that if you're going to do it right, do research first. Because research is going to, before you code, before you develop, research is going to help you discover the mistakes before you commit them to code. And while we're all about agile and MVPs and quick cycle times, right? That costs money, right? Every time you put something to code, it has a value to it. It's not free. And so some user research, whether rigorous or quick, is going to help you hone in even quicker so that you can build the right MVP and cut down some of those cycle times. So one of the ways you start this is you do a competitive landscape. So you figure out who are the competitors and how they do stuff and how they meet the problem. But you also do comparative. And so a comparative is not the same industry, but they do something similar. So for the competitive, we did Skyscanner. We looked at Skyscanner. We looked at, probably 30 plus travel applications that were similar to Compare. And we tried to see how they inspired travel. Comparative, we looked at some companies, and one of the companies I know we looked at was LendingTree. LendingTree is a loan mortgage company. It's similar to Fair Compare because you're searching through a lot of the different loan rates, different banks, and you're trying to pick the right bank. Just like Fair Compare has you search through a lot of airlines and flight tickets, and you're trying to pick the best flight. So there's a comparative, there's a similar system there. And so we looked at these companies to try to figure out, well, how do they inspire people to do what they want to do? In the instance of LendingTree, how do you inspire people to buy a house? Or how do you inspire people to do something else? So this is really important. It's a first step to try to figure out what to do. Then we did user interviews. And so this is, we were doing a user interview here, a lovely photo from Handsome Days. And we did about 15 user interviews. Some of those were over Zoom, and some of those were face-to-face. I definitely recommend face-to-face if you can do it. Because users don't know what they want. It's there for you to create something that they feel they want, but they didn't realize it until they found it, right? And so, the goal of user research is to have and ask questions that are open-ended and follow rabbit trails where they go. I've seen Jonathan Lewis. He was the head of user research at Handsome at the time, and he's like my idol, right? His interviewing power is the superpower, I will tell you that. But as product managers, we need to know how to do this as well. And so one of the things that I did is I sat in on every single interview. I took notes, but I also, you know, listened to the people being interviewed, but also I learned how to interview better from Jonathan. And while I'm not as good as Jonathan, I learned a lot of stuff from him, and he was definitely a role model as a product person, how to get better at the craft. So after you do the user interviews, we synthesized the interviews. And that means you take these interviews, we created transcripts of them, and then we found out keywords and phrases that they used, and we put them up on cards. Here you can see someone said something. And then we started putting them up on affinity boards and organized them topically and put things close together. And I spent, as a product person, I think this is where we're really important, is that once we started putting this on the board, I would just spend days in this room reading the cards and letting it soak in. And every once in a while I would move some cards around, and I would start seeing some patterns that the users would say. And so I really strongly encourage that if you can do this, get user insights, these little quotes that they say, and put them out on cards, post-it notes, work, whatever, and just spend time. Thank you for that question. I'll get up to that. But definitely, I'd spend some time in that room, right? I call it baking. Like a cake, you need some time to bake the cake. If you pull out the cake too early, it's going to be half baked, right? And so the same concept arrives here: is you don't want to rush through this process. Spend the time you need, especially on these affinity boards. But I think you'll know it when it's time. After that, you go into ideation. So you soaked up the information, and then you start coming up with ideas. And so in the case of Fair Compare, I spent probably, for me personally, I spent like 4 days reading these cards, moving them around, things like that. During the same time, the UX team was building personas. So they were looking at the cards and they were building out rigorous user personas, which were great and I was heavily impressed with. But I focused in on reading the cards, moving them around, digesting them, trying to figure out how they work together out of all the 15 user interviews. And then I started creating cards of ideas. And I think we came up with I think honestly about 180 different product ideas for a mobile app. Quickly narrowed those down to 120. But the first idea is an ideation, any idea you throw up there, right? I think one of our ideas was get bought by Yahoo, right? Silly idea, especially nowadays, and we know what happened to Yahoo. But any idea, it doesn't matter how silly, how stupid, you write it on a card and you put it up there, right? Then once you have all the cards on the board and you're pretty much running out of ideas, then you start converging and you start removing ideas, right? And you know, we did that. We moved from, I think, 180 to down to 120, and then from 120 down to 80, 80 down to 40, and then I created elevator pitches for every single idea, for 40 different ideas. Knocked those down to 24, knocked the 24 down to 14. Then we took the 14 to the stakeholders, and this is where you're getting into convergence, right? Is your ideas, you got it 14, now you're sharing it with other people, the 14 best ideas, and you start challenging them, right? And you start narrowing them down, and we narrowed them down to 4 ideas that we thought were really interesting ideas. Out of 180 down to 4. And this is where we started doing user testing. We didn't code, we created wireframes, and from the wireframes, we met with, I think, about 10 users and had them walk through each wireframe of each idea, and we got more feedback and insights. And from that, we came up with, actually 2 of the ideas merged into one. Certain things have merged into one, and that's where we came up with our product. So the summary of the in-depth process, it took a lot of time. I think it was 1 p.m., which is me. We had 2 UX researchers. We had 2 designers involved. We had 4 weeks of this intensive research to narrow us down into one idea. We had 15 user interviews. That's 1,013 minutes of audio that we listened to. And I think I listened to each one of them at least twice. So it took a lot of time. Out of those 1,013 minutes of audios, we created 545 different cards. And of those 545 cards, we came up with, I think, 180, but really a good 120 ideas. I created 40 elevator pitches, 14 ideas pitched, 4 ideas tested. So that kind of gives you, it kind of answers your question on how long did the process take. This is how long it took. This is the effort that went into it that created one idea. And so we designed it. By the way, Handsome had an awesome design team, so it was a beautiful app, and it was really great. So what was the result of this? Okay. Fail. Now, this is not Fair Compare's assessment, and this is not Handsome's assessment. This is my personal assessment. So why did it fail? The user research was very powerful. And one of the most, I will never forget this, one of the user insights said, we asked, you know, a user who was looking at their Instagram pictures of travel, right? And she said, I want to go to this place. And we asked her, why do you want to go to this place? And she said, I like the hair of the girl in the selfie. That was really bizarre. And we're like, what does that mean? What we realized after doing a lot of user interviews is that people like to do things that they see other people doing who they think are cool. Fascinating. So it has nothing to do with the location as much as it has to do with the cool person at that location. And this became the essence of the product we want to create, is basically an app of travel stories from the perspective of the person who went on the journey. That would inspire people to travel, and of course we made it easy to buy tickets. So that was the core essence. That was like the cornerstone of the application that we had to do. in order to follow the user research. And the user research was very strong on this. However, when we presented this, Fair Compare was very nervous. They didn't want travel bloggers to write about this. They wanted to hire their own marketing department to write. And we very clearly told them that users don't like articles written by marketing. They like articles written in the first person perspective of someone who actually went there. And so as a result, you know, we went back and forth, and ultimately, because we're an agency and we had to listen to our user, and you know, as a product person, I was trying to convince them of this, and this is maybe my failing at the time, is we could not convince them to let travel bloggers write the articles. We could only convince them to get their marketing team to write the articles, but write them in the first person narrative and pretend that they went there. And I had some ethical issues with this because they're pretending. But anyways, this is what we went with. And, you know, we created the app, we launched it. And, you know, I've kept up with the app online, and it's not been successful, not tons of downloads. And so that's why I call it a fail. And I believe it failed because users can tell you're faking it, right? And they didn't follow our direction. They didn't follow the user research process. So you can do the process that's crazy and really in depth, but if you don't listen to the results, you still can fail, right? Let's talk about a completely different example now, right? What am I on time here? This won't be as long. But this is at a company at TopTal. At TopTal, I was a senior product manager of the client experience. So I was in charge of the client experience. And this project, I had 5 different products I was in charge of. I'm going to focus on one of them, which is referrals. And this project was from 2016, 2017 is when I worked at it. And again, I was at TopTal. So the problem that TopTal came to me, they said, referrals are dropping. Why? Fix it, right? I love that, right? And so that's great. I was really excited. I'm like, oh, here's a problem I can fix, right? Here's the other problem. There was a strong anti-user research bias at TopTal, and it came from the very top. And so we were not allowed to do user research, which was really bizarre because I was hired because I was a user-focused product person. So that was confused me for a bit. But so this is going to be a good example of guerrilla user research. Basically, you know, how to do it. So when I dug into the problem, first you go to data, because TopTal was very data driven. Unfortunately, the data didn't help. The data was very noisy. TopTal throws events all the time. And so there's spikes in their data, and there was no reason that I could find that was clear that I could create a very strong argument why the referrals were going down. And you can see, like, I created a whole bunch of data-driven charts and did some A/B testing and so on and so forth. And one of the things, I created an A/B test. So I followed some UX design patterns that we all know. I couldn't do user research, but I followed design patterns. And you can see here in the second pictures, the first picture was the original. I made some changes. The changes created a 49% increase. And then I made more changes, which created another 20% increase in referrals. So just changing the user experience, just following normal user experience patterns, had a huge impact of growing referrals 60%. And then I started looking at the data. And the data said, like here at the X, you see, that's when I started the user A/B test. And it went up, right? And I was all excited. And then I started looking at the data of who were the top referrers. And then, boom, I saw why it jumped. One user made that jump. Just one user, one referral. this person created a referral link on Quora, and that article went viral. And people started clicking on that link, and it had nothing to do with my A/B test. It had nothing to do, I mean, it had maybe a little bit. It was like, no, I mean, I couldn't prove it, right? So I had to remove that user from my data. And then, yeah, there was a bump, but it wasn't as significant. And so I was frustrated. Like, I had to figure out who is this user. And so I went and I started doing Covert Operations. So I actually did start speaking to users secretly. And when I say secretly, I worked with the sales team. I worked with a couple people, and I said, you know, hey, if there's 1 or 2 users I can talk to, who would you recommend? So I wasn't completely secret. It was just the people who were anti-user research didn't know about it. And so it created this weird subculture where people were doing user research, but it was unofficial. So we didn't have the budget for it. We couldn't do it like rigorous like we did at Handsome. We just did it, you know, as best we could. And so here's this is what happened, right? Is I was the only PM. I had 5 different products. This product, I only could spend 5% of my time. So that's important to notice. So I had to figure out how to make the best use of my 5% of my time. So I had conversations with some users, figuring out, like, first, that guy who skyrocketed, right? I didn't know why it skyrocketed, so I actually got a call with him, and I talked to him like, hey, you're doing really great at referrals, you know? How is that, right? And then he told me his story, and I'm like, oh, great, that's not duplicatable, but that's great to know. I installed a tool called Full Story. Full Story recorded user interactions on the website. And so I was able to watch how users use the tools and the product. And while I couldn't interview them, I could observe them and start creating some deductions. So this was some way that I could do user research without officially doing it. It's definitely qualitative data. I did multiple subtle iterations and improved on it again and again and again. And I would closely watch how users interacted it. And then I would follow up with certain users to see what they thought about it, who I saw interacting. And then sometimes I took big risks. So I had a hypothesis based off of how I saw some users promoting our referral links, and I took those big risks. So what was the result of this very guerrilla covert user research and analysis? I was able to drive revenue, 3.5 million in 12 months. So is that a success? Why do I say it wasn't it was a success? I mean, 3.5 million, actually, it was a $100 million company. So I raised their revenue 3.5%. So I think that's impressive, right? However, it's sad because I was pretty much in handcuffs. And I truly believe if I was given the freedom to do user research and to do the actions that I thought I could do to improve the product, I could have raised revenue 60 million, right? So is it success? Yeah, it looks like success, but the truth is it could have been a heck of a lot better. And that's what made me sad, and ultimately one of the reasons I'm no longer at TopTal. However, how do you deal with stakeholders who don't really believe in user research? And I think this is a problem that a lot of us in product run into, is we want to do user research, but there's a lot of problems in that. And so I go down to, and it's just 2 things, right? Earn autonomy, prove results. And sometimes you have to prove results to earn autonomy, then you prove more results, and you earn more autonomy, and so on and so forth, right? And most healthy companies, if you do this cycle, right? Earn autonomy, prove results, earn autonomy, prove results. If you keep doing that, you'll eventually get to what you want to do. And if you're at a company that doesn't allow you to do this, then, and you really believe this is important, then maybe you should consider going to another company. because ultimately, we want to build, as product managers, we want to build really great products. And to build great products, we have to focus on the users, who are the ones who determine greatness. And I am not Nostradamus. I am not a prophet. I can't determine what a user loves without actually talking to the user, right? I'm not magic, and so we as product managers need to make it very clear that we need to deal with the customer, with the user of our product, and we need to spend a lot of time. So how to do this at home, right? So this is something that I recommend everybody to do. If you're looking for a new job, this is a really good idea. Pick an app or site, and then interview users who use it, or might be potential users. Actually go out and do this, right? Then do user testing on it with those users, and then synthesize, suggest improvements, and then create a blog article, right? Or like a case study, and post it on Medium or Product Hire. There's several sites where you can post where product people join together. Then send that article to the product managers at that company, right? And get feedback from them, right? And they will, right? And then of course get feedback from user researchers on how you did and your methodologies, and keep on doing this. Do this for multiple products, right? So you can look on my Medium. I did this for Skyscanner and a couple other sites, and I actually reached out to Skyscanner, and they loved my research, and actually they interviewed me and so on and so forth. So it got me an interview that I wasn't even looking for. But it's a good fun thing to practice guerrilla, because you don't have access to their users, you don't have access to their data, but you can still do a lot of the user research with people around you who use this tool to hone your craft and get better at it. And so how to grow, I recommend you read UX articles. So every day in my day, I tend to take 30 minutes to 1 hour, and I just read current technology trends and user research trends. I read articles, and that keeps me up to what's going on. I also, another way to grow is find companies that do user research amazingly well, and go work there, like get hired, right? Work with amazing people. And that's what I really thought about Handsome, is Handsome taught me so much, in that I got to work with genius user researchers, and I can't speak well enough of them. Other ways, you can take an online class. Like I mentioned before the start of this talk, Austin Center of Design, there are local ones, there's online ones, there's things on Udemy or other online courses. Feel free. There's only so much you can learn from a class, though. You need to go out and do, right? And learn from doing it. So my recommendation is to actually do it. That's why I recommend taking an app and doing it on an app, right? And publishing it. And then practice, 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 hone the craft over time. You're not going to become a great user researcher over a week, right? And I think this is important to understand, that as product managers, we should be user focused, look at qualitative and quantitative data from the users. But at the end of the day, our goal is not to become the perfect UX researcher. Hopefully we can hire them, because it is a job, it is a profession. There are people who are amazingly great at this, and they're not great product managers. You need to be a great product manager and work with user researchers. They are one tool in our tool belt, right? So that's why product managers are really important. Do your job well. Don't have to do everything as an expert, but you need to be pretty good at everything, right? And that's the kind of the conundrum of product management, is why it's hard, is that you need to know enough not to be dangerous, but you don't have to be a unicorn. So thank you. You can follow me on Twitter. I do it somewhat. LinkedIn, feel free to add me. Do an intro that you heard me on this. You can read my Medium articles. I publish sometimes. You can email me, mark@producthire.com. And then check out the current stuff I'm working on. I actually have a startup called producthire.com, which is a job search site for product managers, and it's all product managers focused. They can post articles and case studies and things like that. I'm also a product head of a fintech company in Turkey called Kredian.com. And then I'm SVP of product and user experience at BoomWriter.com, which is an ed tech company. So hopefully I left enough time because it doesn't have a clock on this. But any questions? Let's do the AMA. I'll take the first question, just keep on posting it. Would you suggest any other ways to break into PM? So that's a great question. So I broke into PM in an interesting way, and maybe it's non-traditional. So I was a software engineer, and I moved into HCI, and then I actually started my own software company. And over time, my customers needed more and more business advice and so on and so forth. So I started becoming a fractional CTO, but also somewhat of a product person. And over time, I eventually sold that company, and I tried to figure out what do I do. And I was looking at all the job titles, like should I be a technologist? Should I be, something else? And one of my friends actually talked to me about product management, and I'm like, what's that? I've never heard of it. And so I actually took Pragmatic Marketing Product Management course, just to see how it goes. And it was like a 2-day course. And in that course, I realized I do all of this already, right? And so that's when I realized, oh, I'm a product manager. And so that's how I broke into product management, is from an entrepreneurial background. My first company where I was an official product person was at Handsome. And the reason I chose Handsome is I had always worked with amazing software developers, but I didn't think I actually got to work with amazing designers or user people, right? So I was looking specifically for a company that was user focused, and that's why I chose Handsome. And yeah, it was a great entry. Next question: what blogs, websites you follow to keep up with UX trends? Good question. The main thing I do is, there's tons of blogs, there's no lack of them. I actually use the app, I use my iPad. So I use the app Flipboard, right? And I actually, because I'm low on time, generally I go to the gym and I'm on an elliptical and I put my iPad out and I spend an hour on the elliptical and go through articles on Flipboard that follow UX, and there's a lot of different kind of categories you can follow, and so they tend to feed me the articles. And sometimes I read blogs that I get on LinkedIn and stuff like that. But Flipboard has generally the best highlights, I think. Could you recommend a few tools that you use in User Research Suite? So I think that's a good question. It depends on the budget, right? So when I joined BoomWriter, I was the first main product person. And I needed to figure out what are the tools I need in order to figure out where we're at and how to get forward. And so I'll be honest, I fell in love with Full Story. Full Story is great because it video records how people are using the app, and that immediately gives me information, right? It's also important because I can get the team to start watching the users so that they can start getting empathy for the users. So empathy is really important. On Full Story, you can see where people have trouble finding things and clicking and rage clicks and things like that. So start simple. I always say start simple. Don't try to, you get to the top of the mountain by climbing up the mountain. You don't jump on top of the mountain, right? And so don't try to take on more complex tools that you don't have time to utilize. So for example, we were looking at tools like Amplitude that do user journeys and analysis. It's quite an expensive application, but even more so, I thought it was an expensive application because it would take a lot of my time to actually utilize it, right? And so always try to balance, like, hey, there's lots of tools out there. let me pick the ones that are going to get me the most immediate results with the least amount of effort until the team builds out, that we can start taking, getting more complicated and so on and so forth. So it depends on where you're at in your company. If you're a startup, you're going to look at a certain set of tools. If you're at an enterprise company, you're going to look at a completely different set of tools. And so it's a very hard question, but there's a lot of great tools out there that, people use. How to switch from a business-to-business SaaS PM role to a business-to-consumer PM role. Is it difficult? As B2B limits user research. Okay, so that's an interesting, there's a lot of assumptions built into that. So I don't know if it is difficult. I guess it might be based on the scenario. I've moved between B2B to B2C, right? I've done enterprise. I think a good PM is a good PM, right? I'm maybe a rare person, but I believe that a product person should be a great generalist, which means it doesn't matter on what planet you land, you can figure it out. And so there are more focused PM roles, but I definitely think PM should be more generalist than not. And so I think a great PM would be really good at B2B as opposed to B2C. However, there is a caveat here. It depends on back end or front end, right? So if you're an enterprise API PM, that's going to take a very different skill set than a mobile app for consumers, right? And so, that's probably the hard transition, is more of a back end person as opposed to a front end person, which is why I'm not a PM for APIs, because it would probably kill my soul, because I love working with users. And so I pick the jobs that I know that I'll have joy in, right? Which is working with users. Let's see. So to break into roles at big tech firms, what backgrounds do they look for? Oh gosh. So that's what roles do they look for? That's a good question. So I have friends who work at companies like Google and Twitter and places like that. And I've interviewed at those companies. I actually teach people how to interview for these companies. I'll say this, it's well documented what they look for. So you can go to Glassdoor, you can go to producthire.com. I've written articles on it. I teach on this. Finding out what they look for isn't hard. The problem is that you and everybody else wants to work at Google. So it's not what they want to look for, it's that they have so many people who apply that they can pick anyone they want. And so you might be a great PM, but there's probably somebody greater than you. And if they apply, then, so, every company, Facebook is different, Google is different, Twitter is different. There are some things that are similar. What I argue is that and this is going to be controversial, right? I would argue great PMs work at all sorts of companies. They can work at small companies, startups, and they can work at large companies. And my goal is not to work at Google. I've kind of decided I don't want to work at Google for various reasons, dealing with their product process. But I realize that I can actually have more impact and do greater things by working at startups. And so that's why I work at pretty much startups nowadays. What methods do you employ for user interviews? How do you conduct user interviews to gain insight without dictating users what to do? Yeah, okay. So this is hard, right? So I start off with trying to figure out what type of user. So you have to figure out what users you want to interview. And then you come up with an interview script. And this takes a lot of time, to be honest, because you want to ask questions that are not biased. You want to ask questions that are open-ended. that are going to let the user control the conversation with you just nudging it back and forth a little bit, right? Because sometimes the coolest information comes in things that are completely not related to your question, right? And so what I would say is this is a skill that's actually, it might be a talent, to be honest. So skills are things you can learn. Talent, I think, is something that you're just given, right? And for example, I mentioned Jonathan Lewis, who I worked with. He has a talent for interviewing. I'm trying to pick up the skills for interviewing. So I'm not by any means saying I am an expert at this. You know, in my current company, I am full deep in user research right now. I don't have a user researcher, so I'm doing all the user interviews myself. And you know, I'll be honest, after every user interview, my brain is fried because it takes every ounce of energy of me to analyze and talk and come up with follow-up questions and things like that, and not to be biased, because it's a hard job not to be biased and to come up with good follow-up questions. So, you know, just be aware that it takes time to do that. Could you recommend a few good analytics tools for B2B SaaS products? That's probably not my, I'm not going to answer that. It's not a good question for me to answer because I'm currently not in B2B. You know, there's a lot of people who are probably better to answer that. So I'm going to skip that. What are the best methods for user research? And what are the best B2B, B2C analytical tools which you would suggest? Okay, so best methods, again, look, if you're worried about having a method before you start, don't start doing user research. But, you know, what I generally do is I get a group of users that I kind of want to talk to. I send them out a survey that asks some questions, and then at the end, I ask them, are they willing to be part of a user research study? And I give them like a $25 Amazon gift card if they will do it. So the goal of the survey is not to get a lot of data, right? Because surveys generally are pretty bad. The goal of the survey is for me to get them to opt into the user interview. And then when I start looking at, you know, this list of people who opted in, then I start looking at the data in the survey and saying, oh, this person did this. Yeah, I want to talk to them. Or this person did this. So, you know, definitely I use surveys to help me segment those who I want to interview with. But then I schedule the interview with them, and then I do the user interviews. You need to spend time with your users, right? And so that's the, you know, what other method helps with that? And there are more tools to do that with. There's a lot of methods, but whatever you do, spend time with your users. And then the analytic tools, you know, again, it depends on the maturity of the company. You know, at TopTal, we had our built-in. We actually had an analytics team that built analytics tools for us. I also use Mixpanel. You know, there's things I liked about Mixpanel. We also use Tableau to actually look at the raw data and analyze our own data. That was useful. So, you know, it really depends on the company. It's really hard for me to answer that. I apologize. Is there a structure you follow to budget your time across different phases of user research? Yeah. You know, a product manager has there's many steps, you know, from user research to design, and then there's execution, which is development and launch, right? And we spend different times at each phase. And so for user research, I always try to put up in the forefront as much user research as possible. It's not always possible though, right? Like, you know, sometimes you have to make decisions off of no data. I hate making decisions off of no data. You can see this, actually, I have on my whiteboard here. It says, my opinion, however interesting it is irrelevant, right? And what I mean by that is I am not the user, right? And it's a good thing for us to remember. We are not the users. So if we make decisions based off of our experience, they're very possibly going to be wrong, right? And even if they're based off of our past experience working with other users, that's not our users. So as fast as possible, you need to do user research. And sometimes you have to do guerrilla user research. You know, sometimes you don't have permission. Sometimes you don't have the budget. So you just need to figure out how to make it work. And as a product person, that's our job to do that and to solve that problem. And then eventually to make a process where the rest of the team gets buy-in and they also help in it. So, okay. So, and then, you know, of course, the more you can put up front, the better. Of course, budgets, you know, allow certain things. So I'm spending this month, July, doing user research. And then in August, I'm going to be transitioning not from probably about 80% user research down to about 20% user research because I have other things to do, right? So that's kind of how I did this. But I believe a product person and a company should always be involved in some form of user research. It never stops. Is it necessary to have a software background? No, no. I don't believe it is necessary to have a software background to be a product person. For certain product roles, I think it is necessary, but you can be a great generalist, but I think you do need to be technical, especially if you're working in software. I mean, come on, guys. If you're working in software, you need to understand software, right? So you don't need to be a software engineer to become a product person, but you do need to be a fast learner. You do need to be technical. You need to understand how technology works. The dev team does need to respect you because you're telling them what to do, right? And so while I don't think you need to be a software engineer, you do need to be technical. At the same time, I think being a software engineer can even hurt you. So if you always think the solution to something is technology, well, sometimes it's a business process. Sometimes it's a marketing process that needs to be changed, not a business process. So definitely don't, you know, think about your problems, think about the root problems and try to solve them. And sometimes that's technology and sometimes it's not technology. Any other questions? I got 2 minutes. Your top 3 tips would be to someone in their early 20s. Don't listen to other people in their early 20s. That's top tip number 1. Number 2, find out who you want to be in 10 years. Find the person who's doing that and get them to mentor you, right? And then another tip, life is not all about career. Think about your soul. Your health of your whole mental state, your emotion, your spiritual, and your physical is really important. And don't get so caught up in, you know, at the end of the day, no one's going to remember the products I made, right? I'm dead. So think about your long-term stuff. And anything else? Prioritize features and timeline. So you prioritize, you basically create a matrix, and from that matrix you determine, you know, what's time, money, value, impact, things like that, and you basically can create a matrix off of that, like this is high, this is low, and over time you can decide what is the best thing to do. It's just basic prioritization, tons of articles written on it. It's not too hard. Sometimes you're wrong and you have to reprioritize. That's life. Things change. You're transitioning from a PO from a QA to a PO from a QA. I started looking at learning material, and there's a lot of it, of course. How do you suggest I prioritize my learning path and how much time spent on it? I can't recommend enough. Find out who's doing the job you want to do and ask them this question. Find mentors. All of you should do mentors. You know, find mentors. You know, I have mentors, by the way, right? You know, even the more senior you get, find mentors that do different things. You know, I find mentors who do certain things really well, and then I find a mentor who does something well at something else. I'm always trying to learn. I'm always trying to get better. So find mentors who are happy to teach. And does road mapping help? Oh, road mapping, that's a whole nother conversation. some people want a long-term roadmap for business. You tend to want a long-term roadmap, but really in product, I'm a big believer in, really anything farther than 3 months out, who knows, right? And I tend to set up that expectation is that, hey, I'm focusing on the next 3 months. I have to deliver in this next 3 months. What happens 6 months out, like kind of maybe this, but really I'm not guaranteeing it. The next 3 months is what I'm focused on. LinkedIn is a good way to find mentors, but really you should find a mentor who's local to you. I mean, if you have no one local to you, then I guess LinkedIn. But go network. Networking is good. Find people and say, hey, you're really good at this. Do you mind if we have coffee once a month or every 2 weeks, and maybe you could mentor me? See if they're open to that in a formal way or informal. Formal's better because then they feel a little bit responsible, or informal if that's all you can get. Okay, I think time is up unless there's any other pressing questions.
I guess that would be the end of the session. I'd just like to take a second and just share an information that we have around 7 to 8 of such webinars which are scheduled in the coming month. So if anyone wants to participate, and check out our events page. There is a lot more information about our guests who would be taking webinars. Like Mark, this session was pretty commendable. We really appreciate the insight that you've shared with our audience. One more information that our next cohort is starting from August 2nd. We would like you to visit our page and have a look at our intensive course, which includes around 326 topics into 20 modules. You would find our unique feature of around building and shipping the product with web development team and design teams. Also, we have Industry Connect program. So few of you might be facing difficulties how to transit to PM roles. You can opt in for our recruitment services, where we help prepare with mock interviews with industry leaders as well as the peer mock interviews. So yeah, that would be it. You should be following up with you, where we would be sharing all kind of discounts which are available with us for the current course. Feel free to reach us on our LinkedIn page, Facebook page.
If you have other questions, feel free to email me. It's mark@producthired.com, and or add me to LinkedIn. Just be sure to put a comment in so that I know where you came from, because a lot of people try to add me and
awesome.
Too many.
Awesome. Hi Mark, Tilvinder here. I had a pretty bad network throughout the session, so I was just jumping in, jumping out continuously. But good that now I had it. I just want to take this moment to thank you so much for spending so much of time preparing an awesome presentation. I loved I loved the 2 examples that you gave. Both of them very insightful, because I believe people talk about user research a lot, but they don't share real examples where they can actually, attendees can actually understand what really goes into it. I love the entire funnel that you explained, which goes on to show the amount of effort that it takes. But I think that should be taken more positively, instead of that, oh my God, it takes too much of time. We don't have it, and let's just skip it. I think
don't skip it.
I think people should realize the value of it. Thank you so much, Mark, for taking out time for this. And I think it will be too early for you also, right? It is quite early for you as well.
No, it's 11 a.m. I'm good. It's about time for lunch.
Oh yeah, sorry. You're in Austin. I'm in San Francisco. So yeah, it's early for me. Okay. Thank you so much, Mark, and look forward to interacting with you more often. And all the best for all the activities that you're doing now.
Sounds great. Take it easy, all.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.